A really warm welcome to everyone that's joined us for today's webinar. My name is Abigail Roberts and I'm a Sustainability Officer at Camden Council, and I'm really kindly joined by Akta, who is founder of Inhabit, and Sanya Poleschuk, founder of Sanya Poleschuk Architects. So we'll be hearing from them a little bit later on, and kind of looking into detail as to what what home retrofit might look like. Jackson Beitler, who is Camden's Climate Programme Manager, will also be kind of responding to questions in the chat box function. So please do feel free to submit questions throughout the session. We will be having an allotted time towards the end for questions anyway, where we can unmute, kind of put our video on and have a bit more of a discussion. But yes, Jackson will be sort of fielding those questions for me. So I think if we kind of get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking a little bit at the Green Homes grant and just sort of doing a review of this. So this was this was our first webinar as part of our Retrofit Webinar Series, and we held this back in October. And this was all around the Green Homes grant and how that funding can help to enable people to kind of make energy efficiency improvements within the home. So essentially, the Retrofit Webinar Series is all about how we can make homes warmer, cheaper to heat, and more energy efficient. So hopefully this webinar will be of great use to sort of everyone that's joined us on the call today. So a bit about the vouchers themselves. So the vouchers were released by central government earlier on in September, and they are applicable for homeowners and landlords in England to apply for a voucher to help with the costs of installing energy efficient and low carbon heating improvements within the home. So there's sort of a two-tiered approach to this. There's vouchers that are available for homeowners and landlords, and this is for up to the funding amount of £5,000, and this would cover 2/3 of the funding for the work. The other side to it is the low income vouchers for homeowners, and this is a funding amount of up to £10,000, and the full amount of the cost of works is funded with that stream of the voucher. The higher amount isn't actually applicable to landlords, so it's just the £5,000 amount that's applicable to both the homeowners and landlords. But I will come onto sort of how those funding streams work in a little bit later on, and sort of how that works with implementing measures and so on. So when the scheme was initially launched, all works were to be completed by the 31st of March of 2021. Since then, the government has extended the scheme, and all works must now be completed by the later date of 31st of March of 2022. So there was some initial concern from when we held the first session that, kind of the 31st of March 2021 seems so close. How is it possible to align everything with kind of sourcing contractors, quotes and so on? So the fact that there's this extension to the scheme is a really kind of positive thing, but that doesn't mean we should be delaying any of our thoughts about thinking about retrofit. So the time is still to act now. So kind of looking at the measures that we can install. So to complete your application for the Green Homes grant, you will need to install a primary measure. And there's two different avenues that you could take with this. You could go down the insulation route. So this could be a solid wall, underfloor, loft, or alternatively, you could go down the low carbon heat route, and that would include the installation of heat pumps or solar thermal. So you've kind of got a bit of an option there with the primary measures, but at least one of these must be submitted as part of the voucher application. So kind of following that primary measure stage, once you've installed one of those, you can actually apply for funding for a secondary measure to be included. And this again could apply to windows and doors, so glazing, or improving heating controls within the home. One thing to note with this, though, is whatever amount of funding is awarded for the primary measure also applies to the secondary measure. So I guess that is, you perhaps may view that as a constraint, but it's just something to be kind of, worthwhile of. So an example of how sort of this voucher spend might break down, and which touches upon this kind of the same amount being applied to both primary and secondary measures is explained a little bit more clearly here. So if we just take a look at this sort of first column of the homeowner and landlord voucher at £5,000. So for example, say if you're looking to install some floor insulation and this totals £2,400, the voucher contribution would cover £1,600 of this, which equates to the 2/3 of the funding. And then you would be liable to pay the remainder, which would be £800. If we then move down to the secondary measure, for example, say you're looking at installing some glazing and this totals £4,000, you are then still capped at £1,600, which is what was previously awarded for the primary measure. So just something to be mindful of. If we look into sort of this higher amount voucher for low income, floor insulation at £2,400, the voucher would cover the full amount for this. And then if we look at the secondary glazing, which is the secondary measure, say again this is £4,000, the cost of the voucher would only total £2,400, as this is what was previously awarded. So it's a great way of kind of implementing various different measures, but yeah, worth being mindful that the fact that it's capped at your previous measure. So just moving on as to the application process for the vouchers, the Simple Energy Advice website is a really great starting point for this. There's a really user-friendly eligibility checker, which helps you determine which funding stream you could access. So this is really worthwhile sort of having a play around with that. There's also lots of really useful information to do with the grant located on their website as well. Following that, the next step would be to have a think about what it is that you want to do with your property, whether that be now, what you're looking to do in the future, and how that kind of can be sort of bundled up all together. The next step following that would be to get quotes for the work. Ideally, 3 quotes would be recommended. I think this just sort of helps with kind of quality control and kind of making sure that you're going with someone that you feel comfortable with and the price point is right for you. Following that, you'll need the quote information in order to submit your application. And once you have submitted your application, it's important that you await confirmation. No works are not able to commence until that confirmation comes through. So really important that you don't start works before having that confirmation. And then following that, the measures are to be installed, and again this must be before March 2022. If the measures are not implemented and works not completed by this point, there is the risk that the voucher will not cover the cost of work. So that's a really important thing to be mindful of when you're kind of speaking to your contractors and looking at the scope of works for your home. And the way that works is the installer applies for the funding once the works have been completed, and then you will be liable to pay the rest to the installer. So in terms of finding a tradesperson, there's 2 really fantastic platforms endorsed by the government. That is the Simple Energy Advice sort of checker and also Trustmark. And these platforms will connect you with contractors, installers, tradespeople that are certified to the Green Homes Grant and to carrying out those works, so that you can have confidence with knowing that you're going with a trusted tradesperson. Really quite simple to use, user friendly. You can submit postcode and the measure that you're looking at perhaps installing, be that insulation, and that will then connect you to various different installers that will be able to install that measure for you local to your area. So these are really great platforms to use to find your tradesperson. Just a couple of key pointers to be wary of. Really important to check the terms and conditions of the Green Homes Grant Scheme before applying for the funding. As with anything, it's really important to do your research, and as well, it's worth noting that at any point the government could redact this funding. I don't see that being something that would be likely to happen given it's recently been extended, but again, something to be mindful of. There's also risks if the works can't be completed in the voucher timescales, as I've mentioned. And I think that that really kind of links in with contractors being inundated with these queries and jobs as the scheme was launched in September of this year. So there has been quite a lot of activity around the Green Homes Grant so far. Another kind of point of information, there's a couple of links here to both our Camden website and also the Centre for Sustainable Energy. Some really useful resources there about what measures you can install, so definitely worth checking those out. A little bit more about Camden support and how we can support your retrofit journey. Various different grants available for residents, private tenants, landlords through Camden, and if you follow the link, there's lots more information available about our Warmer, Greener, Cheaper programme and various different tiers of grants available with different amounts of money. We also have the Camden Climate Fund as well, and that homeowners can apply for up to £1,500 or 50% of renewable energy costs. So that's another avenue that could be pursued. So definitely worth taking a look at what other grants that we have available alongside the Green Homes Grant that is being offered nationally, and seeing how that can all match up and how those funding pots can support one another. But it is the applicant's responsibility to determine that. We also have our Retrofit Webinar Series, which is recently launched. This is our second session, but we have a whole host of webinars coming up. And the idea is that it's a point of touch point where you can access information about retro and so on. We also have our Green Camden helpline, and you can bring this at any point for any further queries or support to do with retrofit. So I'd really encourage accessing all of those resources. I'm now going to pass over to Akta, who's going to talk to us a little bit more why you would want to retrofit and also some of the project work that she's been looking at. Over to you, Akta.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for that, Abby. So as Abby mentioned, I'm the founder of a business called Inhabit. This is our 10th year of retrofitting buildings, and can you hear me okay? I'm going to talk to you about why you might retrofit. Sorry, Abby, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the reasons why you might retrofit that are not just to do with carbon, which obviously is a big driver, but there are other benefits as well. So retrofit all became popular around, or started to become popular around 15 years ago. And this was for a combination of carbon and control reasons. So the houses that we live in this country, the more older buildings, were built to be run and managed in a completely different way to the way that we live now. And so they were expensive to run and they were not comfortable. So we took examples of people from Europe who had designed and devised systems to improve building performance. And building performance just means that you have that your building works much better for you. So the same way as that you would look into the performance of a car, you should start to look at how your building performs in accordance with the way you live. That doesn't just mean how you live in the space, but it also means how it makes you feel. Abby, please can I have the next slide? So we look at three main elements in building performance. The first is cost. So how much does it cost to run and maintain over the lifetime of the building? So that's the building itself and also the period in which you're going to live in. Homes that have been retrofitted can cost up to 75% less to heat and power. And done right, the maintenance cost of this can be heavily reduced, as provided that your systems are designed and installed correctly. The other reason the other way that we look at building performance is how comfortable the building is. So the home that you live in should be warm in the winter and cool in the summer and should have fresh air all the way through. I'll talk to you about how this can be achieved shortly. Adding the insulation and triple glazing also makes your home much more quiet and more peaceful, and it allows you to control using the systems that you have installed the internal comfort levels of the building. So as well as sort of heat and cool and quiet, there is some anecdotal evidence to demonstrate other benefits. So the more fresh air that's in the building, the less CO2 that's in there. So people have reported anecdotally improved sleeping patterns. They have reported less dust in the building, which makes absolute sense. And also overall well-being, because the temperatures and the levels are so well controlled, they report overall improved well-being. Obviously, the reason that we're all here is to improve carbon emissions from the existing building stock. Just a note to let you know that 25% of the carbon emissions in the UK come from our existing buildings, and the buildings that exist today are going to continue to exist for the next 50 years, so we've got to do something about them. The buildings that are wholly retrofitted can reduce carbon emissions by up to 90%. And this is what is known as good quality carbon savings, because you don't need to do anything to repeat the carbon savings year on year, so they come back again and again and again. The process for renovation or retrofitting your building can be made much easier if you're renovating anyway. So Abby, could you skip 2 slides onto the photograph slide, if that's okay?
Akta, are you okay to just turn your video off, because the audio is dropping a bit in and out?
Sure, I'll do that.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
So if you could go onto the slide that's headed Lena Gardens, that would be great. So this was our first ever project. It was the UK's first ever retrofit delivered to what's known as passive house standards, which is a standard that was delivered in Germany around 35 years ago, and it was a comfort standard. So the person who devised it saw that he wasn't living in particularly comfortable surroundings. He was a building physicist, luckily, and devised what's known as the fabric first method to achieve very low energy standards for heat and cooling. What it does is that it looks at the square meterage of your house and reduces the kilowatt hours required to heat and cool it right down. So before we retrofitted this house, it used 195 kilowatt hours per meter squared to heat and cool. And that was a bit of an estimate because it had just been purchased, and we did measurements over a 3-month period. Once we completed the works, the house used 15 kilowatt hours per meter squared to heat and cool. That's over a 95% saving. And the house, going back to our building performance characteristics, it costs only £300 a year to heat and power and cool, and there are 6 occupants living in that house. The house was in a bit of a mess when it was first purchased, so there was an opportunity to renovate it fully, and it's always easier when you're renovating it anyway, and much more easy if you're renovating it to the extent that you can see here. And if you're looking at this level of renovation and you don't renovate it to low energy standards, what that means is that you're locking the carbon in for the life cycle of that renovation work that you're doing. So you're locking those carbon emissions in for another 10 to 15 years. If we could get the next slide, Abby. We used the passive house method, but using those primary and secondary measures that the Green Homes Grant is looking to fund. So we used insulation, heavy levels of insulation, high levels of air tightness, and good levels of ventilation. And then you can see that we have measures of renewable heat. So on the top left, you can see that there are some solar thermal panels which provide hot water. And at the bottom right, you can see a big square thing. That's an air source heat pump with a ventilation system in there. So had the Green Homes Grant been available, all of the measures here, apart from the green roof that you can see in the middle there, would have been eligible for the works. Once this whole project was very heavily designed. It took 9 months to completion, and the results, if we can go on to the next slide, shows a massive reduction in energy consumption year on year. So it shows that the work actually worked. If we can go on to the next slide, I wanted to show you an example of someone who wasn't undergoing such heavy renovation. So it's another old Victorian terrace. The house was really cold and drafty. There was quite a lot of internal redecoration to do, but we weren't taking off the floor joists or anything like that. But it still achieved a 75% reduction in carbon emissions and that, I mean, given what it was like before, that's fairly significant, and it was much less hassle, took 6 months to do, and cost 40% less. If we go on to the next slide, we'll be able to see the impact. Here are some of the measures that we've included. A lot of them are the same, but you can see that it wasn't as extensive. And if I could get onto the graph, we can see that then year on year, we can see the same pattern of energy consumption, totally predictable, totally manageable. And I think it was in March 2018, you can see that there's a slight increase in electricity consumption. And from that, we found out that the clients had bought an electric car. So all of that also includes the electricity for their family's transport, which is absolutely fantastic. If you're not renovating anyway, there are some things that you can do, easy wins. If we could have the next slide after that. There are some things that you can do to reduce carbon emissions and improve comfort. So have a look at your EPC if you have one, or get one. They cost about £50, and you can see how well your house is performing, and A being the best, and I think it's G being the worst performing. Arrange an energy survey, or what's now known as a retrofit plan, and get an expert around to let you know what you can do. They're not the cheapest thing, but they're absolutely fantastic, because you have a qualified person to come and look at your house, feel the comfort levels, look at exactly what's going on in your house, and make you a plan for short, medium and longer term improvements. And they should also be able to tell you how you might be able to spend the Green Homes Grant. And you should also check what you're consuming. And that's not the same as what's in your bills, which is often estimated. Have a look at whether you've got a smart meter or a normal meter. Keep having a look at it and seeing whether you're using more or less, and get to know your patterns and see how you can improve. There are some other very cheap basics that you can do. So making sure that your loft is insulated if you have a loft. Doing draft proofing, so under the external doors, making sure your windows have got no drafts in. And if you've got a fireplace that you don't use, you could perhaps put a chimney balloon or a chimney sweep up there so that the cold air doesn't come through. Making sure that you understand how your heating controls work. Not turning on radiators on rooms that you don't use. It makes an enormous amount of difference. And switching off appliances if they're not being used. A solar and an air source heat pump are very easy measures under the Green Homes Grant that you can install without too much disruption, but although it's not particularly cheap. And that's all I had to say. I think Sanya's got a fantastic case study that she can go through in much more detail.
Thanks very much for that. Akta, great presentation. I'm going to hand over now to Sanya, if you want to jump in.
Yes, hello. So I'm Sanya Poleschuk, behind this Sanya Poleschuk Architects firm. I will say immediately, as you can see from the photo, that this case study is another thorough retrofit and redevelopment. And it was, in terms of procurement, tendered to 3 different builders. The cheapest, or rather the most appropriate, was chosen, and the works took about 7 months on site. And this is pretty much a lot of it covered or happening during the COVID restrictions. So it's a kind of minor miracle that it delivered. It has just completed last month. So I would like just a second, next slide, please, just to talk about the location, if I may. As you can see, the greyed area, it's the site itself. It's located in Fitzjones and Netherhall Conservation Area, which is an important aspect of any redevelopment, at least as thorough redevelopment as this one was. It is, however, close to Belsize Park Underground Station and Hampstead Heath Station, and numerous bus routes. So in terms of sustainability and carbon footprint in traffic, or usage of public transport, is a very well placed. a few words about the conservation area attributes. It's an area which has a rich mix of properties: residential, community, commercial, and of course health, with Royal Free just in the sort of right-hand side corner of this image. Roslyn Hill, in terms of conservation area appraisal, says forms part of the main road from central London to Hampstead, and it's a broad street with white pavements. All of this is important in understanding how one addresses refurbishment of such property. It goes on to say that the houses between number 9 and number 9D are a group of 2-story houses with garages at the rear, built in late 1950s, with a different scale to the adjoining properties, but they work as a group. Number 9B, which is the subject of this case study, is a part of a terrace next to the junction of Roslyn Hill and Lyndhurst Garden, and it is accessed via a very generous front garden, which you'd think it's a sort of positive thing, but in fact, given its location pretty much on the traffic lights, it renders the garden pretty useless for any amenity purposes. But understanding that gives one opportunity to think of what to do with appropriately with front versus back garden. If I could go for the next slide, which I believe is this. Oh yeah, just a bit of before. As you can see, the property was empty for over 2 years, and it's not really surprising given its location, and I kind of call it an ugly duckling, because it's not immediately obvious how you could make it amazing, but that's where I guess my architect hat comes in, and I could see immediately that it could be just made into a swan with just a little know-how. The following slide, please. So these are photographs showing the way the house was in the built in the 50s and lived in, not really redeveloped significantly or not at all. Classically, it's a small, relatively speaking, small house, just under 95 square meters with unused loft, flat ceilings on top, and long garden, but mostly paved and no extension. It had never been altered, which meant that despite the fact that it is in a conservation area, certain works could be carried out under permitted development right. That does not mean you can just go on and do them. It means you still have to let the council know you intend to do them and describe how. It just means that aesthetic comments by the neighbourhood do not form part of it. So anything that you'd want to do at the back of the property, so things that are not visible to the general public, can be done under permitted development right. Next slide, please. This is a section, for a better word, through the site, going left to right. You can see the so-called front garden, then you can see the property, the back garden, and the two interventions that we did with the back garden under permitted development right, and that is the studio at the far end, number 12, and an extension associated with the main building at the sort of center of the image. Those two additions added 22 square meters to the property, so it is now 116 square meters total. But really, more importantly, the space was in a way added without necessarily adding the new build. And when I say that, I mean it in particular where it comes hand in hand with improving the fabric. So if you've ever heard fabric first term, it means improving the existing building fabric the best as best as you can. And in conservation area, it inevitably means improving it within or inside, not at the front, not at the addition, not changes to external walls or indeed roofs. What is perhaps, I hope what is relatively easy to see is the sort of darker grey line, which shows the additional insulation we put to the walls. You will see later on also in between the walls, i.e. in the cavity, but also to the roof. And having done so, we've then opened the roof spaces to add the volume to the inside. We've also obviously insulated the floor, and again, you'll see the photos of that. So that's all to do with fabric first. Also changed all the glazing and doors to triple glazing and to insulated front door. The other improvements were installation of locally heat generating technologies, which is air source heat pump and photo and solar voltaics. This property uses no gas for heating or hot water generation. It's solely electricity powered. Much of that electricity is generated on site. We decided not to store any just as yet because battery storage and technology hasn't quite come up to the economics that would warranty putting it in. But that means that the energy that's generated during the summer in particular is quite likely not entirely used by the property itself, but it goes into the grid and helps decarbonizing the grid, which we all use. If you could, sorry, go to the following slide. So that tells the plan, the ground and the first floor. What we didn't change, as I said, a great deal. We did a little bit of reshuffle. So for instance, you saw the picture of the kitchen, which used to face the street. We reversed the layout and put the kitchen in the rear extension and allocated the old kitchen to a really generous utility. A house with a lot of energy generation on site does come up with a lot of plant, and having a good utility room is a perfect place to rationalize all the plant in one. We also positioned the air source heat pump in the front, and that's a story probably worth mentioning with regards to planning, because although we did not require any planning permission for neither the studio in the back garden, nor the rear extension, nor any of the solar or thermal technologies, we required a full planning permission to position the air source heat pump in the front. It is a conservation area, so we had to submit the full analysis of what the conservation area means and how this introduction of an air source heat pump will not be to the detriment of the area, which wasn't as easy to pass as I would have thought it would be. And I think it leaves something with the council to work with, which I know they are prepared to. And I just look forward to future applications not having such a difficult route. Following slide, please. Sorry, Abigail, if I could have the slide, next slide. So you can see the elevations from the front and the back. The front elevation you'd be hard pressed to spot, but it does have the air source heat pump, and it is situated right in front of the ground floor window in an enclosure which we redesigned or adapted the original feature on the building, which used to store coal for old kitchen, and making a parallel between the 21st century service to the building vis-a-vis the 1950s service was literally the only way where we could push this air source heat pumps location in the front garden, having also had to commission the noise or acoustic studies that would prove that this pump is not going to add to any more noise that the traffic lights or traffic already causes. Following slide, please. So these are the features we undertook during the retrofit. As I said, the 1950s buildings were famously built with cavity walls, but cavities are empty. So we were able to install the cavity insulation, which is this blown, for all intents and purposes, styrofoam kind of beads, which you can do without necessarily stripping the building the way we did, because it's blown in from outside and you can't see the nozzle marks. Anyway, that wasn't quite enough for us, so we also added the internal insulation to the walls, which you can see. The picture on the right-hand side bottom shows a new floor, underfloor heated and insulated. Following slide, please. So when I said we added insulation internally, people always feel, oh, well, it's going to, we're going to lose useful floor area, but I think with a good eye and with the understanding of how you can create space, you can more than regain that space by, for instance, opening up the loft space and incorporating it into the rooms. What I didn't mention is the air tightness, which means that all of the insulation is taped. And as you can see, the old air bricks in the walls are all removed. And instead, the following slide, please. The ventilation is achieved through air source heat pump, which isn't shown in this image, but will be shortly. This shows another of the features we find as important in refurbishments and retrofits, which is to reclaim and reuse. So in the left-hand image, you can see a lot of old reclaimed concrete blocks, which you will see later on we reused for paving the front and the back garden. And you can see the new blocks, concrete blocks, but insulation concrete blocks, with which we rebuild a studio in the back. You can see in the central image a couple of men on the roof there installing solar panels. The whole of the back roof is pretty much tiled with solar panels, which are replacing tiles, so they are not laying on top of the tiles. They are simply in line with the rest of the roof. Next image, please. I think the following images show, yes, the after retrofit. So you can see the air source heat pump disguised in the front garden. You, as I said, be hard pressed to see it's there. The kitchen is now at the back with the view of the garden, and the living area opens straight into the kitchen. And we reused all the flooring that was in the old living area, and having insulated installed underfloor heating, reinstalled it. And we just introduced new brick to sort of work with the brick that the back is overwhelmed with in any event. So if you go for the next slide, you will see the property from the back. That's the rear extension. As you can see, it's sort of nestled between the bricks of the adjoining building and using the brick of the adjoining building as part of the interior. The concrete blocks on the floor are reused and just laid in sand. So over time, the hope is that they will grow with the little grass that's at the moment just separating the new brick and the old concrete. You can see the rear bedroom that used to have a flat ceiling and look really pokey, with the new open ceiling, fully insulated, and the sort of feeling of height that the space like that gains. And finally, the last picture, which will show the very neatly, tightly packed as mechanical ventilation, which also purifies the air, and it's hidden above the bathrooms, which are the only two rooms in the house that maintain the old flat ceiling. I think that's probably all I have to say. Probably Akta could say a few more words about air source, sorry, not air source, but mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which this photograph shows, and how easy it is to maintain it, and how well it cleans the air and prevents noise transfer from outside into the property, and how actually incredibly quiet itself is. You cannot tell once inside the property that there is a machine like that quietly at work while you are going about your life.
You've explained a lot of the benefits there, Sanya, but essentially it's a method of controlling ventilation throughout the building that should only be installed if your home has relatively good levels of airtightness in the first place. So airtightness means no drafts, so you have to provide ventilation somewhere, so that this is provided through some form of mechanical ventilation. What this machine does as well, is it provides some heat recovery. So it takes the heat that is generated from the warm and wet rooms of the house, which are kitchen and bathroom, and so it extracts that, cleans it, compresses it, mixes it with fresh air that it draws from outside, and spreads it around the house. And what it means is that because it's all filtered and and the air in the house is regularly replaced, much more regularly than uncontrolled ventilation, which comes from the drafts and opening and closing windows, it makes for a very, very fresh and comfortable and healthy environment. And the reason why this makes the house so quiet and secure is that, of course, you don't need to open windows to get the ventilation that you need. So it's safe and it's very quiet.
Thank you for that, Akta and Sanya. I think those pictures do the house such justice. I think it's fantastic to see it go all the way sort of from, pre-work to sort of final completion. So thank you for those presentations. I'm conscious of the time. I know we've run over a little bit. There were a couple of questions that we received during the registration process. So I'm just going to quickly go through these now, and then we can take anything that comes from anyone else on the call. So one of the questions that came through was to do with grants and, you know, kind of what grants there are available to homeowners. Hopefully we've been able to touch upon some of that earlier on in the presentation through the funding available from the Green Homes Grant Scheme, and also through the Camden, the funding that Camden can help to support residents with. It really is worth checking out our website and reading a bit more into the various different grants that we offer, from sort of bronze through to a gold grant. And again, that's based on different criteria and also different funding amounts. Again, we also have the Camden Climate Fund, and all these links are obviously included in the presentation, and we will circulate these slides afterwards. So there is sort of a plethora of grants that are available, be that from a Camden perspective, but also from a national scale as well in terms of the Green Homes Grant Scheme. Sanya really kind of touched upon sort of the challenges that retrofit brings with conservation areas, and with many of the buildings in Camden either being listed or falling into these conservation areas. I think it's really important to sort of acknowledge that how do these retrofit changes apply to these buildings. Just before we go on to the other question, I'm just going to tab to the next slide, which is a little bit to do with planning guidance. So this was something that we took a little bit more of a deeper dive into in our previous retrofit webinar, and we were joined by some planning officers. But here there's a number of different guidance that the council have collated to help with understanding kind of what those changes mean for houses that are either listed or falling into the conservation areas. Something else worth noting is that our sort of planning team are currently working on putting together these fact sheets, which you can see here, entitled Solid Wall Insulation. So these fact sheets are due to be available on the website either towards the end of this week or early next week. And essentially what that is, what the fact sheets go through, they go through each of the measures that do fall under the Green Homes Grant Scheme, and it would kind of just provide some information as to what to expect cost-wise, improvement, disruption. You can see sort of the little green box there with the icons to sort of signify where that falls on the spectrum, and as well what that means for listed buildings. As you can see here, hopefully you can see anyway, that within a conservation area, planning permission wouldn't be required, but in the case of a listed building, it's likely that it would be required, and that the measure actually wouldn't be suitable for a building in that is listed. So we will have these fact sheets available for each of the measures, and hopefully that should provide a little bit more of a steer as to which measures might be appropriate in buildings within the borough.
Can I just add, even on listed buildings, there are plenty ways that one can, in particular, improve the draft. You know, I always say sliding sash windows were invented to keep the drafts going, because that's what kept the fires burning in the fireplaces.
Right. Yeah.
It's a good, you know, building physics, simple building physics. But we rarely use open fires for heating nowadays, so there's no reason why we should be maintaining drafty sashes. You can absolutely properly draft proof the sliding sashes that can still slide and have draft proof brushes installed in them, and can have, in many cases, the single glazing replaced with small, thin, slim-light glazing. All of that can be done with within the listed building limitation and requirements. Not to mention internal shutters, heavy curtains, you know, a kind of common sense features that we've slightly forgotten about, which all work with listed building. Internal, and again, some parts of listed buildings are less sacrosanct than others. So lower ground floor, lofts, top floors where there are no, or where there are no cornices or new cornices, or, you know, replacement skirtings, they can all be properly, thoroughly insulated internally without any detrimental effect to the listed building. It just needs to be assessed case by case.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Sanya. So if I just jump back, again, yeah, this was a question that that came through, and a really interesting one that I'm sure others might be kind of in the same situation. You know, someone that's a leaseholder of a flat in Camden, yeah, Camden are the freeholder, but the flat needs insulating. Sort of where does that responsibility lie? Is it Camden that's applying for the grant, or is it the leaseholder? And again, this is sort of it's a sort of case by case specific sort of situation, and it's one that we would encourage to speak directly to our leaseholder services to kind of establish sort of the remits of the lease and kind of what the situation is with that. Jackson, I don't know if you just want to elaborate a little bit more on that point.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as a freehold leaseholder of a building that is in a sort of Camden freehold, if it's in a block of flats, then Camden will we look strategically at our investment program across those estates, and have to look at those buildings as a whole, rather than on a sort of individual property by property basis. So if there was some insulation to be installed in an area that wasn't within the sort of the grounds of lease agreement, then it's likely that we would have to say, for example, if we were doing external wall insulation of a building, you can't just do that for one flat. You have to look at the block as a whole to ensure that it performs efficiently. But yes, there are obviously lots of different circumstances for all the different types of flat and building. And I think if it's a specific situation, then it's definitely worth getting in touch with the appropriate teams at the council to discuss your specific lease arrangement and whether any works you could complete any works within the remit of your lease of the property.
Thanks for that, Jackson. I don't know if there's any other questions that have come through the chat, or if there's anyone that wants to unmute and put a question to any of us.
There's nothing in the chat, but yes.
I think we might just move on to some concluding remarks then and wrap this up, because I know we've run over a little bit. So I think just sort of echoing the points that both Akta and Sanya have made, sort of this whole house focus on retrofit is a really important aspect of the design, and ensuring that you know, retrofit that's completed, it's high quality. There is funding and support out there that's available, lots of different funding pots. It's just kind of seeing how they all fit together, and it's really important to do, as you would with anything, kind of due diligence, research, considering the risks and challenges that you may find with those, and also engaging with trusted contractors, ensuring that you know, it's someone that's been certified, that's certified and trusted, and has kind of gone through those rigorous processes with Trustmark and the SEA to ensure that they are sort of the right fit to be carrying out works under the Green Homes Grant. So yeah, kind of lots of different things to consider, but they shouldn't be sort of a reason to, you know, postpone or delay looking at retrofit and what that might mean. Again, finally, just moving on to some resources, just to signpost you to various different websites that we've kind of touched upon in the presentation. And again, moving on to some of our upcoming webinars. I know we're kind of getting towards the end of this year, and thinking to next year seems, you know, kind of a little bit strange at the moment. But we've got various different webinars that we are in the process of putting together for next year. And all this information will be available on our website, which you'll be able to get to via the links that are included in this presentation. But essentially, something for everyone. We'll be looking at what we can do in terms of solar power and group buying for that for residents, how businesses might go about retrofitting, again looking a bit more at minimum energy efficient standards for landlords, and also what you can do when you can't retrofit. You know, we have lots of different kind of social private renters in the borough, and it's not always easy to do these deep or accessible to do these deep retrofits. So yeah, something for everyone in the upcoming webinars. So hopefully we will see some of you at one of those sessions. I think that's kind of everything from me. I don't know if anyone else has got any final concluding comments, any of our speakers?
Not for me. Thanks for arranging though, and thanks for having us.
No, that's all right. A huge thank you to both Sanya and Akta for joining us and kind of talking us through the home retrofit process. I think it's so fantastic to see the pictures of before and after. I think it's really amazing to see what's possible.
Thank you, Abigail, and thank you, Camden, for giving it a try. There is a lot more we can do, and we should do it together.
Couldn't agree more, Sanya.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks,
everyone.